Setting a growth rate target at 3.5%. That is what the finance minister shared today. What does that particularly mean?
3.5% basically means you consolidate and recover the economy. That's what it means. It's not the growth rate that Pakistan needs, which is about 6 to 7%, but this is the interim period that we need to sort of recover from the floods, from the excessive inflation, from the problems that we faced in this fiscal year, which has been a pretty tough year, to be honest. The government did the best that it could. And when we talk about 3.5%, we have to bear in mind it's from 0.3%. They're planning to jump more than 11 times of that growth. So the economy will be consolidating. That's what's expected. The economy will be getting back on its feet. It takes time. And from there into 2025, it's expected to grow faster than this.
Right. Let me take Mr. Fateh's view on this particular 3%. So what measures or the reforms do you think should be taken by the government for the next fiscal year in order to bring that GDP growth rate target to 3.5% from that 0.3%?
The government is going to be taking the 5 E's that it's talked about, and they're going to try to implement them on the ground. The first is exports. Exports have to be shot up. They don't have to be increased, they have to be shot up. I've been involved in the export thing before, so I know that sector-wise you have to move sector-wise, and you have to remove all the impediments. That sort of helps things grow. When we talk about exports, we're not just talking about hard exports. We're also talking about IT-enabled services. We're talking about IT services. This is something that has been repeatedly been growing in Pakistan, but then something comes up and it sort of slows down. So that's also part of the export process. The best part about IT exports, IT service exports, is you need a smaller base to sort of deliver those services. You don't need a massive industrial base to deliver those exports. Having said that, when you talk about environment, when you talk about equity, when you talk about empowerment, and there's one more point, that all of these things will be translated one way or another onto the ground. Right now, and I cannot stress this enough, it is that it's a plan which needs to be executed till the end. It cannot be left midway. It can be adjusted midway, but it should be executed till the end, which is exactly, I think, what the government is planning on doing. When we start with exports, we make our life easy, because right now exports is the main issue. We need to shoot them up to minimum $40 billion. From there we need to sort of keep pushing them upwards.
So what particular about the IT sector, the kind of target that has been shared by Finance Minister that happens to be around $15 billion. A couple of days before, we saw Prime Minister also chaired a high-level meeting regarding the promotion of the IT sector, and also incentivizing it. So the fixed tax regime is directed the authorities to go for that, introducing that. How important that one is, and how this particular fixed tax regime is going to help in order to enhance the exports in the IT sector?
A fixed tax regime is basically there to bring in simplicity. It's there to make sure that with one payment your full and final liability is not only established but taken care of. What's very interesting in Pakistan's IT service horizon or environment is that you have a lot of young people part of it, and that's something very, very beneficial for Pakistan. But many of these young people don't even know what FBR is. They're earning money, but they don't know what taxation is. So in order to simplify things, instead of going into the complexities of under clause this, your tax is this, this is GST, this is that. So this is a simplified version of establishing a tax liability, which is immediately and in a full and final manner, it is taken care of. So that creates simplicity for the person or company that is involved in this regime. So it basically helps them just focus on work. You know, you have to pay a set amount at once a year, and that's it.
So that is going to be applicable on everybody, no matter how much they are generating the revenue. Is that so?
No, I think this is specific to some classes. We have to look into that. But basically, this is to start people on this front, and to regularize them into the normal system, because we don't want people earning an X amount of dollars and parking it in PayPal or in Abu Dhabi, Dubai, or some other place, or Pioneer. We want that money to come into Pakistan. So the last leg is what the government is trying to simplify. If the taxation system is taken care of, it will basically encourage a lot of inflows of dollars, but this will be specific to certain categories of IT service providers.
Right, Mr. Fateh, watching startups that have generated over 126,000 jobs in this particular sector. The kind of steps which have already been taken, the software technology parks, do you think they are sufficient, or more needs to be done in that regard?
Of course, there's always more that needs to be done, but we have to sort of take stock of what Pakistan has already done. Ignite has done a fantastic job in teaching freelancers and companies how to sort of maximize their or optimize their situation. So we have to sort of take stock and not really aim for the moon unless we strike the treetop. Keeping a strong, aggressive target is very important, but we should sort of, space it out a little bit. Given the fact that we've had a tough year, given the fact that there's been a lot of stuff going on in Pakistan, and given the fact that the government has done the best that it could in this circumstance, when we talk about a subject like IT services, we sort of need to, we need to sort of gradually push it upwards. Right now, if there are two regulatory problems, one of which is that the dollars coming into Pakistan, how do they come in, under what scheme? Secondly, what is the taxation liability, which has partially been taken care of by the, as you had brought up, the slab system. I call it the slab system, the single slab system. Now, if these things are taken care of, then we just need to let the people work. Just let them work for 6 months. We shouldn't tinker with the system too much. Organizations like Ignite are there to help guide anybody who wants to. In fact, they recently launched a very interesting program in which they were sort of telling people how they can maximize their efforts. Whatever they're doing, they can sort of, improve it just a little bit more. So those efforts are there, but, a lot more needs to be done. Pakistan needs, according to my professional analysis, Pakistan needs exports of minimum $60 billion to be very comfortable. We are standing at close to in the 20 billions, late 20, 28 billion or something like that, and that's not going to be very good for us. We need to keep pushing it further up. Pakistan is a nation of 250 million, which to have an export threshold of, let's say, 30 billion, everything included, is really not good enough for us. But we can. The good news is we can push it further upwards. But I stress that whatever plan we make, we have to follow it to the end. We cannot just leave it halfway. Even IMF has said on so many occasions that they talk about reforms, financial reforms. We did start those reforms, but sometimes we just change our direction, or something new comes up. We need to carry out our plans to the end. And in the interim, we need to see if we're doing the right thing. We cannot rely only on IT. IT is one very easy thing that we can focus on because it's already there. We have our industrial base, it's there. The industrial base is slow right now because of the high interest costs, high electricity costs, high gas costs, because there were costs, for example, were provided to some of our major sectors at comparative rates. So we just sort of need to reintroduce those. We need to introduce the remittance loyalty program again so that the remittances start coming in. Right now, we should not overreact to a specific administrative issue. We have to fix that first, and then we have to let the markets settle down. Then we can establish that if these targets are good enough or not. But it's quite understandable that we need to have aggressive targets but spaced out.
Right, Mrs. When we talk about agriculture sector, the other sector, Mr. Fateh has also mentioned, as you also mentioned, the IT sector happens to be the one part. There should be a focus on industry also, reducing the energy cost, as well as when we talk about agriculture, the numbers, the statistics which have been shared in the Economic Survey of Pakistan, agricultural sector growth overall 1.55% as compared to 4.7% last year. Now, when we talk about crop sector growth, it's minus 2.49%, 8.19% last year. So specifically, when we talk about the wheat production, maize production, and sugarcane production, they rose as compared to the production in cotton and rice. They reduced. What do these numbers actually imply?
What they imply is basically that the floods that came into Pakistan had some unforeseen effects, which were, some of them were positive, many were negative. What it implies very directly is that our weather is changing. What it implies even more strenuously is the fact that the rain systems are moving towards the west and to the north, which we have typically seen for centuries. They're changing. So we need to adjust ourselves very quickly. Karachi, just by the way, I've started thinking that Karachi will eventually become a tropical city because of the rains that we get every year. This never happened before. It's become a very regular feature. So we need to adjust ourselves to things that are quite obvious. Having said that, when it comes to crops, of course, we had a horrible year. We had floods which were unprecedented. And that is the major reason that we had negativity. Otherwise, we would have seen more positivity. But those floods perhaps brought something positive as well, which was the growth that we saw. But not all of Pakistan was flooded. A lot of Pakistan was flooded for a period and much of it receded. Having said that, we need to immediately put in what we refer to at the National Security Division as defensive economic measures to sort of counter these changes, so that we can adjust to them based on our will.
Right, Mr. Fateh, what's your understanding of these numbers as per the Economic Survey of Pakistan, regarding your understanding how to uplift this particular sector?
Agriculture is a critical aspect, and we need to break it up into little pieces. One of the solutions that the National Security Division gave was microfarming. It is we sort of need to understand where the demand is coming from and what kind of demand we are facing. Pakistan is importing pulses which we eat on a daily basis. We are an agricultural country, and we imported more than $500 million worth of pulses. We can grow it ourselves. So when it comes to urban agricultural requirements, when it comes to rural agricultural requirements, we need to break it up first. When it comes to, because Pakistan is one of the most urbanized countries on earth, so we need to bring more food into the Pakistan urban area so that the prices become more stable. It's a long drawn out process, but the simplest solution that we can do in the urban areas is to implement the microfarming concept, which is very similar, which is linked to the PARC garden farming concept. Microfarming is a little more strategic, it's a little more broad, it's a little more aggressive. We need to ensure that transporting hundreds of millions of dollars worth of goods into cities has to be managed somehow. We need to bring in something new, something different. Start creating things within the city so that the requirement of the demand is managed internally. We don't have to shift supplies into cities. It's a long story, I won't get into that, but right now agriculture in Pakistan needs to be beefed up, and if the government has allocated $2 trillion to it, it is basically to bring the sector back up on its feet. We cannot have 5 million bales of cotton. We need much more than that. There was a time that we were at 14 million bales of cotton. We've come down to 5. We are importing cotton. So when it comes to very basic things that our industry needs, we need to start producing that. How do we do that? We do that by finding the best alternative.
So how to meet that in the internal demand of the urban areas? What is required for that?
For agriculture?
Yeah.
Okay. Once again, we need to break it up. What do we buy? So what we did an analysis at the National Security Division, and if we take 7 products, starting from potatoes, beans, ginger, garlic and carrots and tomatoes. This is very basic stuff that can be grown in pots. But when you take one house which is producing, let's say, 5 kilograms of vegetables per month, but when you multiply it to 1.5 million households, by the way, there are 3.2 million households, so we're only looking at 1.5 million urban households. The number is staggering. You can actually go into a surplus. You don't need to import tomatoes, you don't need to import pulses, you don't need to import anything. You actually technically become an exporter just by making sure that every house produces these 5 to 7 basic things. What does that do? Or how is it done? It's basically done with all the available resources, the rooftops, the terraces, anything that's available. If nothing else, a small roof is available, which can be used. So these things, the Pakistan Agricultural Research Council is aware of this, and they're working on it now, and we're trying to build up that this momentum that let's stop transporting food from one place to another and start to grow it internally. By the way, I'm not even going to get into hydroponics. Vertical hydroponics don't even take that much space, but they do require a lot of planning. And that needs to be, that's a separate project, and the productivity from that is very high.
There has already been announced by Finance Minister 1150 billion rupees for PSDP.
PSDP is basically there to spur the economy and to ensure that it's like an investment in the economy, and if you get a 0% return, that money is technically safe, but we're trying to get more than 0% on that. PSDP is typically broken up into projects, and of course that happens province-wise. We need to be very careful of the kind of projects that we sort of undertake, because we're looking for multiplier projects that basically have a multiplier economic effect. We cannot go for any kind of project which has which basically takes the money, but it does not produce the equivalent amount of value. So when we have an allocation of PSDP, we need that kind of value in multiples in return. That's how true growth comes about. We cannot have that amount go into projects which are not working properly. So I guess it'll be more a question of planning and how things are basically prioritized, in which the specific projects are given more funds at the earliest, so that they can start. We're looking for multiplier projects.
So what do you understand of this food and water security enhancing physical assets will be done through PSDP spending?
I think, as I said, it's a multiplier concept. You're trying to kill 3 birds with one stone, which is quite logical, and it makes a lot of sense. To institute projects which not only give water security, food security, as well as economic growth in the same flow, I think that's very logical. That's what we need to start doing. We need to start clubbing up things instead of looking at things independently. Everything has a security perspective, everything has an economics perspective. Best to take it together, best to move it together. So if, for example, if any kind of new agriculture project is brought in under this PSDP thing, it of course touches upon food security, it should touch upon water security one way or another, but it should also be spurring the economy one way or another. So we're looking at 3 different targets, but from the same project. That's the best way to move forward.
So by bringing them all together, the 3 different projects, don't you think it's a smart move?
It is. That's exactly what I felt and what I said, that we have to move towards multiplier projects. Multiplier projects, I just want to repeat, are those projects that have multiple positive effects. One allocation, one project should have multiple positive effects. That's typically how it's done throughout the world. It's nothing new, but I'm very happy to hear that we're at least converging those points.
Right, specifically talking about the energy sector, the statistics which have been shared in the Economic Survey of Pakistan. During the press conference, the Finance Minister, by the way, said that by 2025 we'll shift our energy needs to 25% on green energy. How crucial is that? And this 25% on green energy by 2025%, do you think it's practically viable or achievable?
It's extremely important, and it has to be done. It should have been done yesterday, to be honest. But because we have a lot of hydro capacity, we need to revert back to hydro capacity. You see, our energy infrastructure, it has a lot of fossil fuel appetite. And even the National Security Division has given an alternative to this fossil fuel, which is a long story. We won't get into that. But having said that, energy is a continuous requirement. Energy does not diminish overnight. So energy has to have very low input costs. Pakistan's energy is quite expensive, electrical energy, if we look at it, because we're importing a lot of oil to burn it to produce electricity.
So when that comes under the head of the thermal. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
The thermal capacity, which is around 58.8%.
Yeah, more than that, I believe. And when we shift towards renewables, they're typically easily available under natural circumstances, when it comes to sunlight, when it comes to hydro, or when it comes to perhaps some other form. We also have to focus on nuclear, but that's a separate issue. When we talk about renewable energy, the bottom line is the cost has to be less than what we're paying right now. And there's a huge debate that, well, hydro is expensive. Hydro is not expensive. Hydro projects have lives of more than 100 years. So when we are going to analyze them on 30 years, they look expensive. They're actually not expensive when you look at their actual age, which is sometimes 100, 150 years. So when we talk about solar projects, there's this concept that the equipment is very expensive. Yeah, so what? But the production is cheaper. So we have to look at the cost effect, and we have to reduce our input costs as soon as possible.
So when we specifically talk about the solarization, do you think Pakistan can produce or manufacture the solar panels by itself? We have already had the discussion with the panelists in a couple of other shows also regarding the production of solar panels. Does it seem difficult for Pakistan, or do we have to import solar panels also, firstly from abroad?
I think firstly, taking the last point first, I think we'll have to import those panels, because we're not producing them. If we were producing them, this would be a different equation. And to be able to produce things on your own, one has to set up an ecosystem in which those things are created and then consumed. I mean, if you create something, it has to be consumed as well. So setting up the industrial base I think the government is looking at it, but that will take a slightly longer process. But given the fact that our economy is still growing and our population is still growing and our energy requirements are not going down, they're actually going up. So I think even when we bring in that industrial base to produce solar equipment, that'll be good for the country. But we have to do it as I keep stressing, it has to be done in a planned way so that we take it to the end. We don't just stop midway.
Right.